Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature successful business leaders, top law firms, green energy companies, and more. Today, we are joined by a man who was the first Chief Digital Officer of a Fortune 500 company, which just so happened to be McDonald's. He's had an impressive career over the last 25 years, leading companies like Amazon, McDonald's, Volvo, and MGM Resorts. He's the author of the newly released book, Decision Sprint, the new way to innovate into the unknown and move from strategy to action. Atif Rafiq. Atif, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to join you, Matthew.
All right. Before we get too far into it, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Cyberlinks is a leader in providing managed IT and cybersecurity services to small and medium-sized businesses nationwide. Cyberlinks helps companies reduce costs, grow faster, and get more done. If you're tired of waiting for IT or just want to increase productivity while reducing costs, check out cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Atif, so you've got this new book. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. So Decision Sprint is a book that's really about innovation. I've spent 25 years of my career working on innovation from a lot of different facets, sometimes as the innovator, sometimes as a person who was managing teams of innovators, occasionally in very innovative companies, occasionally in companies that were really more traditional and innovation was a new muscle for them. So I've looked at it from a lot of different aspects, and I felt there was a little bit of a void in terms of the hardest part of innovating, which is how you start with the the messy unknowns. Because once you have a bright idea, the next thing you realize often is that there's a lot more questions than answers, and that can kind of work against moving in good ideas forward. And in my experience, I've discovered and really implemented ways in which those unknowns did not make us stuck, but we were able to make them actionable, so we could actually take promising ideas forward. And I decided to write an entire book on how that works, both as a system and as a detailed set of workflows.
Well, I got to tell you, so I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great. And I love how you brought in, all this. You've had a tremendous career already, and and it's only, these been 25 years. And it's really, I love how you bring in the stories and you apply it directly, which is fantastic. So I want to touch base on what you just said about how you deal with these unknowns, because I think that for so many people, the unknowns, whether you're starting a company, you're in a company, doesn't matter what it is, you've got all these unknowns. And I think a lot of times some might call it analysis paralysis. I think it debilitates a lot of people, and you've got some good kind of systems in place. Let's just take a person through it just from the top. How I've got all these unknowns. What do I do? Where do I start? What do you do? How do you deal with that?
Well, I have a mantra, which is exploration before alignment. And I use this mantra in companies because we often rush to solutioning or trying to get started by building something. It could be a prototype. It could be a plan, an execution plan. And what we really shortchange is this process of exploration, which is where we give a home to the unknowns and we take action on them. And the way to do that sounds very simple, but it actually starts with a good list of questions. And if I had a team that met with me around a bright idea and said, we want to take a week just to make sure that we develop a great list of questions that we need to get to the bottom of. And in this week, we won't have any answers, but we'll just surface the right questions, and we'll feel very good that these questions help us avoid any blind spots. And they are the most relevant things to get to the bottom of. I would be delighted. I would tell that team every single instance, yes, please use the week to go do that. Because once you develop a high quality question list, and I'll explain more about how that works and how to get there. And then you start to get to the bottom with some answers to the best of the team's ability, then there's a very high chance that the team will be drawing the right conclusions and putting the best recommendations on the table. Where we have pitfalls in organizations is where there's a rush to solutioning. Maybe we put our judgment into into color things before we really explored or understood what we actually need to explore. Those things work against innovation because they actually just don't create enough clarity for people to be confident about taking the idea forward. So the way it works is I've broken the methodology up into three pieces. The first is exploration, the second is alignment, and the third is decision making. And just to go a little bit deep on exploration, that's actually a phase of the work where basically you make a concerted effort to surface the right considerations, especially the unknowns, and get to the bottom of those. And you do that through developing a great question list. And on the basis of the answers you get from that exploration is when you move on to the process of alignment, which is drawing conclusions and seeing if the stakeholders around the organization agree with those conclusions. Usually when you run a good exploration, that alignment is much easier. And if you have alignment, then you're ready for the third phase, which is decision making, which boils down to committing to the necessary actions that you're actually going to put into your execution plan. So at a high level, it's these three phases of exploration, alignment, and decision making. This is what teams spend weeks and months doing when they have a big idea and they want to get a company to commit to it. And I thought it was important to break it down. And in the book, I actually break it down further into 13 specific workflows.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I tell you what, when you say the 13 specific workflows, obviously that's a little much to detail, but when you say workflows, kind of, can you give us an idea what that looks like and what that really means?
Sure. I mean, let's say that there's a bright idea. One of the very first things we need to do when we're collaborating on an idea is to craft a problem statement. Because if people are trying to solve for different objectives, you're not really going to get the support and alignment that you need across the organization. So crafting a problem statement is a very good place to start. If let's say you're Netflix and you notice there's a lot of password sharing. Well, what is the objective? Is it to crack down on it, or is it to balance the needs of the customer with the commercial needs to actually be fair to everybody? It's probably more of the latter than the former. But if you frame it in one way versus the other, you're probably going to come up with different, recommendations. And if there's, if you discover downstream that you kind of were going down the wrong rabbit hole, then your product's going to suffer. It's probably going to stall. You're going to have fits and starts. So when I say workflow, I mean very specific steps, if you will. The first of which is crafting a problem statement to guide the work.
Okay. So let me ask you this, speaking of questions, because I think I think far too often people, they expect that, oh, I'm just supposed to, make a quick decision and move, better to have, a decision, whether it's right or wrong, and move forward. And I think that the question asking muscle kind of atrophies, right? We're never really asking questions. Kids grow up and they go through school and they're trying to learn stuff. And a lot of kids don't even ask questions in school. And so I like that you take that perspective, because it's that exploration and asking the questions that I think is so important. So I want to ask a question here. Can your McDonald's story? It was fantastic. I just love to hear it, straight from you. Yeah, because you tell it in the book, but I'd love to get it in your own words. Because it's just, on the geek side, fantastic, such a huge undertaking, and I just love to hear the story from you.
Sure. I mean, the backstory is that I was transitioning from Amazon to McDonald's. And so in the year 2013, McDonald's was not doing great as a business. It had essentially flatlined sales, and it was looking for new ways to grow. And it had identified, a couple ways that could kind of revive the company. And digitization was, to the credit of the CEO, something he put his finger on as something that could be one of those growth drivers. And so then his next line of thinking was, well, I need to go to either Google, Amazon, or let's say at that time, Facebook, and pull someone pretty senior out of there to lead the charge. So I was the person that was sort of tapped on the shoulder for that role. And I made the move from Amazon. And mind you, I had built my entire career in pure play and native technology companies. So that was the culture I was accustomed to. Now coming into McDonald's, which is a great company, an iconic company in and of itself, but culturally extremely different, mainly because, it's so successful that you kind of, you don't really, you try and do the same things a little bit better as opposed to do new things. So that was the recipe, if you will, to keep, McDonald's growing into the future. And as a Fortune 500 company, doing the same things a little bit better will help you get, 5% more growth year over year, which is sort of how that kind of company works versus, let's say, Amazon, where 5% is like, oh my gosh, you're fired, right? Because it's more like 50% or 500%, right? It's more, it's brand new space, brand new territory. So the reason I mentioned this backdrop is because the little did I know I was riding the cultural fault line of these, a cultural fault line of a situation where, innovation was sort of the norm versus innovation was something a little bit unfamiliar, but at the same time badly needed, right? So that made my job really hard because it wasn't about coming up with the right ideas. That wasn't good enough. It was also about getting people on board with those ideas, which is much more about culture than it is about the merits of the idea. So some tips around that, which helped me. One is to speak in familiar terms. So, any kind of jargon or slogan or tech talk, that I tried not to do much of that. I tried to speak in familiar terms. So, for example, I would say McDonald's is a great company and a global leader because it's really about three things: taste, value, and convenience. And it's this third thing around convenience, which we've always owned, and we want to make sure we own for the next 50 years. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to invent new ways of using McDonald's. That's where digitization fits in. When you speak in this way, you make people very comfortable because you're not trying to upset the apple cart. You're just trying to take something that's very familiar to the heritage of the company and modernize it. And who can't be on board with that? And so I would go out with that sort of elevator pitch from the board of directors through, sort of my peers in the C-suite, and then enable my team members to go out there in the field and with that same idea. And that sort of settled people like, okay, let's see what these specific ideas are. And so from there, now you can get to business on launching some of your major initiatives, whether that's something like delivery or mobile order and pay, to things that have scaled at McDonald's, like getting rid of lines and moving people towards kiosks where they do a self-service order and the food is brought to them at a table. Those new models didn't exist before I arrived, but working with a lot of smart people, we were able to get those things into the McDonald's customer experience.
I think part of the brilliance there is that I think that people see that all day, every day, that sort of resistance to change. And a lot of people just chalk it up as, oh, people are afraid of change. People don't like change. But I think you have a really great example of that's not necessarily true. That's not what holds people back. I think what stunts it a lot, and I think your story and your approach to that, what was so brilliant about that is it says, hey, look, if you're coming at it from their perspective, what they're comfortable with, and helping to take their story forward, how do we, do that versus, hey, I'm the new guy, or I've got this great new idea, and trying to shove that down people's throats, which I think people often do. Then they're met with resistance, because what's been working has been good, and who we are, everybody wants to be a part of a team, part of a culture, and you come in there and try to disrupt it. No, that's not going to work. Get out. You're not part of the team, right? But you came in and we're like, hey, I'm part of the team, and here's how the team moves forward. And I think if people apply those same sort of things, I don't care how big or small the team is, that same level, that same approach, you take that resistance and you turn it into cooperation. And that was just such a brilliant tactic. I mean,
is that brilliant or a survival mechanism? But I 100% agree with Matthew that right. In the end, you need the collective intelligence of the organization, because at any given idea, it's impossible to really develop that idea and execute it from one corner of the company. It just doesn't work that way, right? For McDonald's to get into new forms of new service models, is what I call them, you needed operations, you need technology, you need marketing. I mean, you need the collective brain of the organization to be solving problems and figuring out how you address these problems, so you actually ship something simple and easy and frictionless for the customer. And so you need to invite people into the problem solving effort without becoming bureaucratic, which is a whole art and science in of itself. And actually, I do believe that the book provides that sweet spot of not veering towards bureaucracy, because we don't like that. We need lean teams, but also not doing autonomous innovation that causes resistance because you haven't involved enough of the organization.
I totally agree. I think that's a great takeaway, and it's surprising because your book is so new, but it's getting some pretty good traction. Yeah.
So today I'm happy to share that the book has hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list in its first week. So it joined some great books out there on the top 10 list. So I look forward to, hopefully this is just the start of a movement where we're moving towards more purposeful innovation. I mean, we're in an environment where every CEO is talking about wanting more from their teams. Today, I learned Shopify did a 20% headcount reduction. Every CEO is talking about getting more out of their organizations and their workforce. So we're kind of in a tumultuous time. I got to be honest with you, because we need innovation more than ever. These companies are not going to, meet their expectations unless they innovate and introduce new things. But at the same time, they need their people to be on board, and they need new ways of working that sort of unlock that innovation. So I'm hoping to make a small contribution to that.
Well, I think your book does that, and congratulations. I mean, that is no small feat. So congrats. Just 1 week out and already on the Wall Street Journal list. That's fantastic. So no, and I think it's great that you've got that recognition, because I think what I really like about your book is that you do such a good job of relaying that. And I think all too often, especially in tech, we look at people like the Elon Musk, not to would love the guy. He's get great mind, but I don't get this, and I don't know him, but I don't get the same feeling of cooperation from the team. I'm not sure that's necessarily his leadership or team approach to things. He gets great results, don't get me wrong, but I think when you take even existing companies and even new companies, I like the approach that you've laid out here, and I think it works for people beautifully. So I'd be surprised if it doesn't land up there with the kind of 7 habits kind of level of things on the business side. So congratulations, that's well done.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad you mentioned Elon, because there is the rare case of a founder, visionary, savant, but that's like an artist, right? Like it's very rare, and for the rest of us mere mortals, we need a system.
Couldn't agree more.
at some point Elon won't be there. And so, one of the things I really respect about Jeff Bezos, having worked at Amazon, is that I think from the beginning he was very intentional about scaling culture. And so what does that mean? That means he's not in the room, but you're kind of thinking like Jeff. And not that Jeff is the only way to think is to think like Jeff, but obviously it's pretty effective to think like Jeff Bezos. And scaling culture is therefore, something you have to put a lot of time and energy to, so that when you're not in the room, teams are like doing really high quality problem solving. And that's where you can get into all kinds of crazy spaces, from grocery to pharmaceutical to, you know, um, entertainment, and really have a pretty high hit rate of your innovation, which is, I think, what makes Amazon different from the other tech giants, is that their hit rate of innovation is pretty good. They don't always win. Sometimes it's a flop. There are a number of flops they've had, but I think there's just less waste, to be honest with you. And it's probably because the culture of problem solving has has scaled. Whereas in the other case where you mentioned, you kind of just trust in Elon, and then
Yeah, and that's all well and good. That's fantastic, but you can't scale Elon, right? I mean, there's just one of him. Whereas, being able to put in a system that allows you to scale, your corporate culture, your people, that's really what businesses need. It's great when you can find an Elon, but they're, once in a lifetime. I wouldn't even say once in a generation. We're like lucky if it's a once in a lifetime kind of deal. Um, but speaking of innovation, at the near the end of the book, you start talking about some of the tools that companies can use, and there's a few things I want to touch base on. But let's first start with your take on AI. And I know it's kind of all the rage right now, and for good reason. Um, you know, from a managerial perspective, how do you see it? What should managers be doing, thinking? What's the future hold here?
I think generative AI, I look at it as a bar raiser for the work of teams. So it's a companion. And what I mean by all this is essentially, I mean, let's say a team is chartered with an initiative. You give them 2 weeks to go figure things out, come back with a recommendation, right? It's very typical stuff in a company. Well, now they come and they put their recommendations on the table. Often, what you're trying to do is poke some holes as a leader and say, well, walk me through how you arrived at these recommendations, kind of thing. And you start asking them questions, right? Um, what we want to make sure is that the questions the team explored, that there were none that, that they left, that they didn't verify, could have been raised or answered by, let's say, ChatGPT or Bard, where there's different um, information coming back that, for example, revealed a blind spot. That wouldn't be a good thing. So if I was the leader and I separately went into Bard or ChatGPT and asked it some questions and said, well, maybe you should think about X or Y. And then the team's recommendation, I said, well, how did you think about X or Y? And they were like, we didn't really think about X or Y. That wouldn't be a good thing. So in this scenario, what I'm trying to paint the picture of is using AI, generative AI, as sort of a tool to help you get to the first draft of the right questions and considerations you should be factoring in to your work. You really teams need to be able to do that. And I think that's coming. And so I think that's kind of getting the first base. But if you really want to round the bases, where we're going with AI in the enterprise, it's huge, actually, because ChatGPT works on the public domain, right? It's 4 billion web pages. But what is the knowledge in the company that's hidden on the whiteboards in people's heads, in the PowerPoints, emails, and Slacks? That is actually the real enterprise repository that you want to point generative AI at. So imagine if every PowerPoint was sucked into some data lake or something like that. Then you point generative AI at it and you bring it to a meeting and you ask it, what do we know about X or Y? And that's sort of like the old term we used to have like 35 years ago, which is knowledge management.
Yep.
Remember that one?
Yep.
It's sort of resurgent, I think, now,
Sure.
you know?
Absolutely.
So I see enterprise AI as being a thing, which is maybe even going to dwarf the kind of chat GBT on the 4 billion public internet pages thing, because companies have a lot at stake. It's their intellectual capital, it's their thinking, it's their ideas. They're going to want to protect it and secure it. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be pretty big. And AI is going to be a way to interact with that knowledge, basically.
Oh, I think that's going to be huge and of great value. I mean, to the enterprise where it's a massive repository of knowledge, of information. It's all out there now. Well, in there, hopefully in the enterprises ecosystem, and to have it able to answer questions using that, that's invaluable. That's going to be huge. Couldn't agree more. Now, speaking of teams, I hear you've got a new venture on the horizon. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I've launched a product called Ritual. Um, it's a collaboration app for teams. You can find us at ritual.work. And the main idea here is that, when people read a book like mine, they're like, oh, we like this way of innovating. We like this way of problem solving. Maybe we'll read your book and we'll change how we do our meetings. And that's great. But the easiest way is to use software workflows. So I almost couldn't resist, the idea of creating a product to enable, this way of innovating and problem solving. So that's what Ritual does. Um, and it does feed into this larger idea of enterprise AI, because when we talked earlier about, well, the teams are brainstorming and deep diving and problem solving, but it's on whiteboards, it's hidden, it's in emails and Slack and everything. If you start to use a workflow for it, well, guess what? All that's will feed these data lakes. Um, and then, you can sign your licensing deal with AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. That's not what I do for a living. And use their AI and point at it, and then start to say, what knowledge do we have in the company, and sort of manage that knowledge. But the only way to actually begin to turn this hidden information around problem solving, thinking, innovation, and move it from hidden to not hidden is through using some type of software tool, which is kind of where Ritual fits into that layer. So I recently started the company with my co-founder, Mike Vo, who's one of the first employees at Facebook. He's a great co-founder. And, we're on the founder path.
Fantastic. Well, we do love founder stories. You kind of hit at it, a little bit there, but can you give us the story? I mean, how it came to be. What you started out. It went from how do you go from idea to actual product creation? First employee, the real founder story, the juice. I know, and I know it's early on, but I'd love to hear the story.
Well, about 3 years ago, I was inspired and I started we started to build software. So we built something for decision making, where it was a very easy tool for companies or for any team to say, like, oh, which decision, what should the decision be? And it sort of helped them um, do that. And we built it and we were pretty excited about it. So we shared it with a very famous venture capitalist, Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz. So I had a meeting with Ben, and he kind of clued me into something. He said, I like, this is good, but I don't think you're going to have a lot of mainstream usage, because how often do companies actually make a decision? It's pretty infrequent. It's like,
Mm.
every month or every quarter. So that got me thinking, okay, if I need to solve for daily engagement with users, because that's venture capitalists want to fund those kind of products,
Mhm.
um, maybe I missed something, which is it's not about the decision itself. It's about all the work leading up to the decision. And I know from managing teams that that's what they spend weeks and months on, and and they have daily usage over those weeks and months, over this whole flow of like starting with we have no clue of what we're going to recommend to coming up with those recommendations. So then I shifted the company to focus on this part, which I call upstream. It's actually a word I use introduced in the book. So this rejection by Ben, it wasn't a rejection. It was like I wasn't really pitching him. I was asking for feedback, but he kind of gave me the feedback I needed, which is, hey, you need to kind of pivot and solve for a different workflow. You're kind of at the end of it when they're ready to make the decision. So that was great because I spent a whole 18 months shifting the product development towards that part. So that's one juicy founder story, which I found pretty helpful. But it kind of put us on the right track. I guess the second one, real quick, would be that we got some AI patents 2 years ago, and a lot of people thought we were kind of a little nuts, where it's just way ahead. Like, how is AI going to affect decision making companies? So you just can't script this stuff, and like the way it's turning out now, where we may be in the right position at the right time. Let's see. It's just you just can't script this stuff as a founder.
That's great. So at this point with Ritual, is this something people can go and get and integrate into their Microsoft Teams now? Or what stage are we at?
So it's for any team in any company, and they can go download the app. There's a version up on our website right now, but in 30 days, so let's say June 1st, we're going to have our kind of our beta release to the public. And in that release, any team can take it down and start using it, meaning it'll be in one of the app stores. And so it'll be very easy for someone to, download it, invite a couple other collaborators, and kind of get going with a lot of these processes and workflows around exploration, for example.
Very cool. All right. Let's see. We do like to ask all of our guests before they leave, if there are, and you've got a lot of kind of great stories in your book, but if there's a mentor that you'd like to give a shout out to, by all means, the floor is yours.
Sure. I will pick Håkan Samuelsson, who's Swedish. He is a former CEO and president of Volvo. He ran the company for 10 years. He was a CEO up until like 2-3 months ago. So he literally just has transitioned. And I really connected with him. And I think he is really defines kind of a modern CEO, because he's what I call an upstream CEO. I mean, he's very quotable, by the way. He's very hilarious. You learn a lot from him. But the main thing is, he's so deeply curious, and he's ready to roll up the sleeves with the teams, and not just manage outcomes. I've been with CEOs who tell me things like, "Oh, my job is to pick the right people and hold them accountable." Wrong. That's like 2 days in a month of work. What are you doing for the other 28? Hakan is the kind of CEO who is there as a thought partner to help you think through, the hard questions, and, help calibrate how you're thinking about the problem, and doesn't tell you what to do, and still gives you the space, and still manages the 80 other things he's doing. But he will create that safe space for the thinking partnership. And any CEO who's thinking, oh, I just have to pick the right people and hire them or promote them based on results, is kind of missing this work in the middle, where teams need your help. They're craving for, for you to be a thought partner. So I give my shout out to him.
Fantastic. And before we head out, can you tell people where they can find your book and where they can find out about Rituals?
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I have a website. It's called decisionsprint.com. On decisionsprint.com, there's links to get the book from any bookstore that you prefer. There is a link for Ritual, which is the software product. And there's also a link for my newsletter on LinkedIn. It's one of the top 20 on LinkedIn globally, and it's called Rewire, and you'll find the link there. And that's where I sort of pump out my own thought leadership on whatever's top of mind at the moment.
Well, fantastic. Well, can't thank you enough for coming on the show today, and I just appreciate you coming out.
I appreciate your time, Matthew. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.